So we're going to start with HTML5 just kind of in general. So there's a lot of kind of chatter about HTML5 that you'll hear and kind of what it is. And the way I like to think of HTML5 is we had HTML4 a long time ago, and after that, browser vendors just started adding in cool features, and people just started doing stuff that made sense. But none of it was really a standard. So HTML5 is kind of a way of sweeping all that up into something manageable. And so, you know, saying like, do you do HTML5, or is that browser HTML5, or is this website HTML5, is kind of a little like, we kind of, you know, the HTML5 spec actually, they're, you know, officially they're saying the spec won't even be ratified for years down the road. So, but there are a lot of common features to it. And so some things to look at. First of all, you know, simpler in terms of putting all these features together. Also semantic. You've got support for these semantic tags. We'll look at it in a second. There's this huge kind of umbrella of stuff. So this ECMAScript 262 is also known as JavaScript, and it's got tons of different little things underneath that. And then you've got things like HTML, CSS, SVG, geolocation, all these other features. And so these are things that are supported to different levels in HTML5. This semantic markup elements, these are really cool. And we'll look at it in a second how these are, you know, built into the new project templates like in MVC4 and web forms. And you know, like a bit of confusion exists then, like, okay, is this an HTML5 markup element, like this header element? So does that mean, can I use it in IE6? And, you know, and so there's this thing called a polyfill. And polyfill, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it comes from like a British term. A polyfill is something like a spackle. Like if there's a hole in the wall, you just kind of put the stuff in and smooth over it, right? Polyfill, right?
Polyfiller, yeah.
Okay. So you know, the idea is like we've got all these kind of old browsers and they're kind of hanging together, and you put this stuff over the top, and it lets you think of it as an HTML5 in modern browser. So Modernizer is this thing that's built in. It's one of the libraries that's in the modern templates and the MVC4 and WebForms 4.5 templates. What that does is it when it starts up, it will say, hey, browser, do you know about the header tag? Do you know about the section tag? And if they don't, it says, don't worry. It just treat it kind of like it's a div. And, you know, and so it basically tells IE6 about this header tag, right? So what that lets you do is then you can write HTML5, and it'll work on IE6, HTML5 semantic elements. I'm not going to run through this whole list here, but the idea is just you've got like header, footer, section, video, audio. These are things that before you would go through and you would write a div tag. And you'd say div ID equals header, you know, or you would say div ID equals footer, or div. And so by doing that, it's generic, and you're not allowing things like screen readers, or, you know, there's no kind of common standard. So this is, like I was saying before with HTML5, the idea is to sweep things together and standardize them. So if you've got a header element, a screen reader can say, okay, links inside this header element are more important and are likely navigation, right? And so by using the MVC4 template or the ASP.NET 4.5 template, you use a header element, and that automatically works better for a lot of reasons. So we talked about like you know, screen readers, but also things like common libraries. We'll say, okay, if you've got a nav tag, I can do this sort of thing. Canvas, I'm not going to look at that. Canvas is a way of drawing on the screen. Video is a standard way of doing video. Skip over some of this. One thing I do want to point out with this. So in the past, doing video, you would use a control. Like you would use you know, Flash, Silverlight, different you know, maybe even like a WMV embed or something. And the problem with that, different levels of browser support. Somebody has to install a plugin. And so what they've done with HTML5 is you've got a video tag. It's a first-class tag. And the problem with that is, And one of the solutions that Silverlight and Flash and other video players solved was they would take care of the different video formats for you, right? Because video is complicated. Streaming video on the web is complicated. So the way they handled that with HTML5 is they said you can have multiple sources. So if your video, if your browser supports, MP4, we're going to use that. Otherwise, if it's, say, Firefox that at the time couldn't distribute MP4 codecs because of, patent things and all that, open source versus patents issues, they said, fine, so we can fall back. So you can actually have several levels. One thing I want to point out here, too. This is a key thing that very few people know about. And I'm on the wrong screen. There it is. That's getting better. Is that no? And see, it looks really different on my screen versus. There we go. So we've got a video tag with a P tag inside of it. Does that confuse anybody? This is something that's been around in HTML for a long time, and it's default content. So you actually could have an object tag with a P tag inside of it, or an object. You could have a Silverlight with a video tag inside of it with a P tag inside of that. And what would happen then is the browser would say, okay, I don't have Silverlight installed. So I'm just going to show the default content here. And in that case, then it would drop back and it would show the video tag. But it would say, wait a minute, I'm IE6 or whatever, I don't have video tag support. So then it'll drop back and it'll show that P tag. And the P tag would say, sorry, you need to go here or you need to download the video or something like that. So this is something I see people doing wrong a lot, and that is writing JavaScript to check for a browser version, or doing some kind of server-side detection to sniff for a browser. And really, this has been built into browsers forever, the idea of default content. So you can have, an object tag with some other default content inside of it, and no need for any JavaScript there. Does that make sense? This is a segue here, but this is something I get excited about. Audio, similar to video. All right, let's take a look at HTML5 in an MVC application. No questions yet? Anybody? Comments? Jokes? So what it's doing right now is it's actually installing jQuery templates. jQuery. jQuery is one of the things. It's installing NuGet packages. So it whizzed by the time I zoomed in. But when you do File New Project and you're like, what's it doing? If you look down in the bottom, it's installing NuGet packages. And so those NuGet packages, this is another segue here, but those NuGet packages are actually, if you went in here and do manage NuGet, where is this? Yeah, you're right. That would be the right place. So if you go here and you look at installed packages, these are all the installed packages, and all I did was File New Project. So before, when I was saying it's important to get to know NuGet, it really is important to get to know NuGet. Now, you could look at that list here, or you can also, there's this packages.config, and this is the list. So these are all, and a lot of these are things like jQuery, right? So these are built-in things. Segue, but important information. So let's look at what is inside the layout, the default layout. So in MVC4, you have a shared layout, which is very similar to site.master in web forms. So if we blow this up a bit, you'll see, first of all, if you've had fun with doc type in the past, the HTML5 doc type is a lot easier. This is also built in, so this will autocomplete for you in HTML, or in the HTML editor in Visual Studio. So now, we've got our standard stuff, and then all of a sudden, boom, header, right? So this is a header tag, and again, this will work for you in something like IE6 or an old Firefox or something, because if we look in our scripts, we have this modernizer. So modernizer is this library that does two things. It tells older browsers about these newer semantic elements, and then it also analyzes the browser and it says, okay, this browser supports the following things. So we'll look at that in a second. That can be really useful both in JavaScript. You can say, hey, browser, do you support this thing? Or you can say, in your CSS, you can say, if this browser supports SVG, use this SVG image. Otherwise, fall back to a PNG, right? So you can, there's actually two ways, if you were paying attention earlier. You could use default content. You could say, use an SVG tag, and inside that tag, fall back to an image. Or you could say, use a CSS class, like if it's on a background image. I have an example of that in a second if it doesn't make sense. So here we've got a header. We also have a footer. And this is a key little thing too, is that we've got all these scripts, and normally you want your scripts to be rendered at the bottom of a page. And so we've actually got these bundles are being rendered at the bottom of the page here, and the bundling system will write them all out at the end. So here we're using render section, and that section is down at the bottom of the page. So I don't think I said that very clearly. The idea is if you want to add scripts in other pages, if you do render section or if you declare a section, it will put them down at this section in the bottom of the page. So now let's take a look at, specifically, I want to go into a case where I use that modernizer thing. So this is this new release of the MVC Music Store. Has anyone here used that MVC Music Store tutorial? Okay, this is a tutorial that is like 150 pages long, but it's if you're new to MVC, it kind of walks you through beginning to end, building a new MVC application. You've seen we've been talking about these, albums and genres and stuff like that, and so those classes are from that tutorial. And so I've got a new version of that, which is I have to finish up the documentation. Hopefully that'll be published along with all this content later this week. So one thing I wanted to do in that was show off using an SVG file. So I wanted to use a logo that was SVG format. SVG is scalable vector graphics, and the idea with scalable vector graphics is, unlike if you take an image and you blow it up really huge, it gets all pixelated, right? Well, SVG is one of these HTML5 features where you declare things as shapes, and because they're shapes, then you're able to say you can blow that up or shrink it down as much as you want, and it's all going to scale smoothly. So for this one, I've got that logo in the top here. So let's go up and take a look at that. So here I've blown it up like 400 times, and those are circles, and I can blow this up 10 million times and zoom way, way, way in, and those circles are still going to be perfectly smooth. And the reason it's able to do that is because they're defined as shapes and not as dots. So let's take a look. I think, I'm kind of winging it on this one, but I think if I double-click, I might be able to see the XML here. Yeah. So here is that logo, and you'll see it's just defined as curves. It's defined as circles and lines. So because of that, it'll scale well. Now, I ran into this, and I've always been a fan of SVG, and I thought, how can I'd like to use an SVG logo. It'll work well on big screens. It'll work well on, say, a Retina display, where you really want that crisp image. But I'm not sure that I want this to work on older browsers. And so in order to do that, I made use of a modernizer style. So let's go and look in here. Hopefully you can see that a bit. So we've got a site title, and I gave it a background image. And I said, I would prefer for this image to be using SVG. So I give it that SVG image. Then I use this HTML.noSVG, and I override it with a different background image. So let's, I think if I've got it running, actually this is going to have SVG, but we'll see some of the other Modernizer classes. So you can see here, this supports obviously so it has like JS, Canvas, Canvas text. So those are things it does support. Some things it doesn't support is WebGL, so it has a no WebGL. It does support geolocation, so I get a geolocation tag. So these are all classes that are automatically inserted for me by this Modernizer library. And this makes it so that I can, in my CSS, I can say, if this browser supports these things, show this stuff, otherwise don't. Any questions on that? No questions at all. No chat questions either, huh? No. All right. Okay, so we've shown, let me make sure I've got the list here that I wanted to. So we've looked at HTML5 features in the templates. We've looked also at using Modernizer to smoothly fall back, so to detect modern features and take advantage of them when they're there. This is a key thing. I hope you've heard this over and over, but you should never be checking for a browser name or a browser version. You should assume that there are a million browsers out there that you've never heard of, and they may support whatever features. So you should only be doing feature detection. Okay, the problem is I have a lot of bizarre hobbies. One of my bizarre hobbies is I find websites that don't work in a particular browser, and I figure out why. And 90% of the time, it's JavaScript. Occasionally now it's CSS also. But I'll look in the JavaScript, and it'll be saying, like, if IE, then do this. Or if Firefox then supports this thing. And it's bad code. It's just plain bad code. The way you should be developing for the web is you should be detecting features. And Modernizer is a great way to do that. Any comments, arguments? I get fired up about this one. So, okay, so now we're going to be taking a look at JavaScript and jQuery. So, this slide is almost certainly way out of date because jQuery just, the use of jQuery is pretty much ubiquitous. People are using jQuery all over the place. Who here is using jQuery pretty regularly? A lot of people are. And there was a common joke years ago when Stack Overflow was getting started, and people would say, I'm having trouble with this JavaScript thing. And the first person would always just say, use jQuery. So, but jQuery really does solve a lot of problems. And for people that were frustrated with JavaScript early on and said, I hate JavaScript, that was me a while ago, but the problem was more that JavaScript is actually a pretty nice language. There's some kind of strange, quirky things with the syntax, but it's really a pretty nice language. But the problem is most people use JavaScript to manipulate the browser DOM. The DOM is a document object model. And the DOM is very quirky because it represents what the browser thinks it's displaying on the screen. And each browser is slightly different, and the way that it reports things is slightly different. So the brilliance of jQuery is that they said, you just talk to us, and we'll kind of route things to the way the browser should work. So again, don't you personally write some code and say, if it looks like it's IE, then do this IE thing. But for instance, a lot of people would say, if it's IE, it doesn't support SVG, but it supports VML. Well, that's all kinds of problems now because VML support has changed and SVG is supported. So probably shouldn't have been doing that, right? And so here's jQuery is a similar thing where you can just say, find something and do something with it. And the jQuery library figures it out. jQuery.com is really what you need to know. There's a bunch of links here, but if you go to jQuery.com, there's quite a bit there. So the flow of working with jQuery is you select something, and then you do something with it. And you can chain these things over and over. So what you're using in jQuery to do your selection is a CSS selector. This is really nice because this is one syntax you can learn and you can use in two places. And it also helps you to write cleaner HTML. So a selector could be something as simple as a tag, P. So if you have a selector that's P, it will select every paragraph on the screen. Or if you say P dot article, or maybe if we're doing that, we should be instead using the article tag, right? The HTML5 article tag. We can say article.first, or we can say something, and then if you use a hash, that's an ID, right? So you can, we use those commonly on the ASP.NET site for table of contents. So we'll say like breaking changes. So we'll have on the MVC4 release notes, we'll have H2 hash breaking changes, right? So then if I want to write CSS or jQuery against that, I can use that selector, hash breaking changes. So you select something and then you do something with it. So as a very simple example, let me try my hand at zooming again. And so here, this selects all divs on the page and hides them. This is probably not something you want to do on your production website. But that's it. And this thing is called, I think, a selection set. So you have a set of things, and then you can do further queries or manipulation on those. Does that make sense? Any questions? The real power here is that you can do things beyond just a simple P tag. So you could say, get me something that does this and also does this. Also, once you've got something selected, you can then... I think is it helpful for me to zoom, or can you... It seems like it might be hard to see from way in the back if I don't zoom. True? Zooming's good. Okay. Good. Okay. So here we're declaring a function. So we say $function. $sign is the jQuery. It's a shorthand for jQuery. So you could replace everywhere on the page where you say $sign, you could say jQuery dot or jQuery parentheses, right? So here we're saying $function. We say $.submit. So this is selecting something with a class of submit. And it's wiring up a click event to it. And it's saying, so what this should say is when I select the button, it's going to post an alert. One cool thing that this is also doing is that $function, that's an anonymous function, but this is saying don't run this until the document is ready. And so this gets around a frustrating thing where if you've got script running before an element is actually created, see, because this script is above that tag, right? So if we just tried in JavaScript to say document.getElementById, then you would be in trouble because the element isn't found. So what this is, when you say $function, that's shorthand for saying that implicitly says when the document is ready. That make sense? That's another cool, jQuery and some of these other newer JavaScript libraries kind of wrap best practices in and take care of some of this kind of frustrating things, or oops, I forgot to check if the document's ready, or defer, or that kind of stuff. Yeah. This is also nice. I'll show you a cool playground in a second where you can work with this more interactively. But here, this is showing that you can chain things. So I can select that bottom thing as I'm selecting a container, I'm appending to it, and then I'm declaring a click function to it. So you can say something.something.something.something, right? So this is really powerful. Again, I'm not going in and doing document, create element. I'm not appending elements manually. And so this works around browser inconsistencies, and it's also just a lot easier to read and type. And demo, hooray. So what I'm doing for this is I've got this thing called JSBin. And there's a lot of these. Do I have this open? Close that. So this is JSBin, and I recommend using interactive development tools as much as possible. JSBin is a kind of fun way to do that. This is in the browser, so here I'm in IE10, and I've got a div with an ID of monkey. And then I've got some jQuery code. And I literally just sat here and banged this out. Like I just kind of, well, maybe this will work, and click around on it. So .fade in. So what this is saying is find something with an ID of monkey. Now, an ID is supposed to be unique on a page, so you should only get one result back. So it's going to find that ID, and it's going to then fade it out. As soon as the fade out completes, it's going to fade it back in. And then it's going to append a UL, an unordered list, and then it's going to append one list item to it. And then it's going to wire up a click element or click event. And since it's on this, it's wiring it up to the thing it just appended. So now we can go over here. And it auto-ran when we loaded, but here if I do, see it faded out, faded in. If I click, then it hides. So this is just kind of, this is a very fun, easy way, an interactive way to get started. And we could go in here and we could instead, we could say, dot append. A p tag.
This is jsbin.com, is that where you
It is, jsbin.com.
And for anybody else, there's also jsfiddle you can use, very similar kind of tool.
Yeah, and they're all, they all have different values, or different things that they'll support. One thing that a lot of these newer ones are doing is they also support adding a library. So I can go in here and I can say I would like jQuery or, prototype or whatever. So this is really pretty easy. You can also, in your browser development tools, you can go in any browser, any modern browser. If you hit F12, you'll get your browser development tools. And you can go into script, and if jQuery is loaded, you can just start, you can hit, $. So this, on the right there, I'm getting my jQuery, and so I can say, $, $div.hide, the most useful, right? And so everything went away. So this is a nice interactive way of working. I just really recommend if you're learning this stuff, this is a great way to just kind of play around and try it out. So you can look at the API on jQuery.com, and then you can fiddle with it. There's also another one I was looking at recently called tinker.io. They all kind of fight each other. They all kind of one-up each other all the time. Tinker.io is okay, so taking a little while to load. And then jsfiddle. I think it's called. .net. Whoever's got .com is making some money. So this is another one, but it's the same kind of thing where you have different panes and you type things and you see it interactively as it's going. And all right, those are just loading away. So that's kind of what I recommend for learning jQuery. There's also there's a few other pointers I want to give you just as far as using jQuery in ASP.NET. So one is if you're using web forms in a web forms application, you can use Juice UI. Juice UI is it uses jQuery UI. So I think I have internet, but I don't know. jQuery UI is a set of plugins. So one thing I kind of glossed over earlier, jQuery has this great DOM selection syntax where you can select things and manipulate them. They also have this plugin model. So people will write a plugin that says this is going to be a image rotator plugin, or this is going to be a menu plugin. And so then you can use this kind of common plugin syntax. It's really pretty easy to write plugins. It's not easy to load web pages, apparently. That's interesting. Let's just close some of these out. There's jsfiddle. Okay, so it is loading. It's just a little slow. There are tons of these plugins floating around, and they're just kind of like some of them get popular and people use them a lot. jQuery UI is an official, let's see if that one loads. So jQuery UI has some kind of official widgets, and there are things like calendar, like the date picker one. So there's a lot of kind of official, commonly used widgets, and also this whole kind of widget system. And it also has support for theming. So you can go in and create a theme, which is really nice, and all the jQuery UI widgets will support that. So Juice UI is a set, it's slowly loading, but if you go to juiceui.com, those are web forms controls that work very well with the jQuery UI widgets. So those were actually written, the Append2 team worked on those. Those are like officially built out by the jQuery team. So good stuff. Let me try Control F5 because that always works. It totally did. That's awesome. So yeah, so Juice UI, and there's a download link. It's also available via NuGet, and there's kind of worked. Okay. So that's it for my jQuery talk, with one tiny last exception, which is in your browser. Remember, I was showing you can do this F12 thing. One common feature people don't know about in modern browsers is this query selector all. And it's actually been around for a while. So if I say document.querySelectorAll, I definitely mistyped this. So if I say div, so that just found all the divs on the page. So I'm going to zoom in on that. Oops. No, okay, that doesn't work. Just do that. Okay, so query selector all is kind of a shorthand. You don't, if you're just doing element selection, you don't necessarily need jQuery just for element selection. This query selector all is a nice JavaScript method that does that. So selecting on the same kind of selectors that you would use before. Does that make sense? Any questions? No? All right, let's go back to some fun slides. Yes?
Does Visual Studio include support for Zepto?
Let me see. So jQuery is bundled with the project templates. You can include any JavaScript library you'd like. And also, I'm not sure IntelliSense-wise, but I wouldn't be surprised. The new, in Visual Studio 2012, the IntelliSense is actually built using JavaScript. So what that means is you use a JavaScript library to add IntelliSense for different file types, different libraries. Yes?
They don't use the thing.
Okay. Yeah, so the question was, is there support for Zepto? Zepto is one of these micro libraries, right? So it's similar to JavaScript, or jQuery. It's similar to jQuery in that it has very similar syntax, but it's a lot lighter. And it's really popular on mobile browsers, tiny download. Honestly, I don't know if the full syntax support is there, but I would be shocked if there wasn't a reference file for that you can install. So we might try that out. Let's do that. So if I go into let's just see if there is a NuGet package for that. So there's two ways to install these NuGet packages. I can right-click reference. I can also go into this isn't running. There's the package manager console. Windows. So if you want to do stuff by command line, so I can say install package. So I tried to do autocomplete on Zepto, and I don't see it, but it's kind of going out to the internet, which is a little slow for me. So we'll see how that works. But I usually try and install everything via NuGet now, including JavaScript libraries, which may sound crazy, but because you're like, well, what kind of dependency would I have? But the idea is a lot of JavaScript libraries depend on each other, and also if you want to update, if you want to, a newer one comes out, this has kind of a common way for updating those. So let me see. I think I'm going to... Visual Studio is busy. Visual Studio is trying to find the internets. Let me kill it. Hooray for the task manager. Okay. So let's go back into that. I'm going to tempt fate by trying the exact same thing again.
So the chat room is saying there is a package zepto.js on,
Zepto.js. Okay.
on the...
Great.
So they've obviously got internet connection.
Yeah, exactly. They're rubbing it in, aren't they? So so here's, that's, you could find it by going in here and do search online and type in Zepto, right? And then also here's a nice little thing about managing your JavaScript files via NuGet. So here I've gone to the updates area, and I can see that I've got jQuery. I have the installed I have 1.7.1.1. Well, 1.8.3 is out, and if I update that, it's going to show what the effects are. Now let's look at jQuery validation. jQuery validation, I have 1.9 installed. I would need, or the newest one is version 1.10, but it also has will show me dependencies in here. So it should. There's no, yeah, here it is. So down at the bottom, dependencies, jQuery 1.3.2. So I need at least jQuery 1.3.2. So what this means is if I went in and installed jQuery validation, just installed that, it would automatically pull down jQuery for me. So it's just kind of a nice way to manage all that. Where are we at with time? Okay. So I wanted to show one other kind of cool thing I hinted at earlier, which is TypeScript. And I actually had a TypeScript demo that I showed before, and I really am no expert on this. I've kind of played with it a bit, but the goal of TypeScript is to kind of make, if you build a JavaScript application that's of any real appreciable size, it can start to get hard to manage. There are some beautiful things about JavaScript in that it is a, prototypal inheritance. It's not, it's more of a dynamic system so that you can, you don't have static classes and things like you do in C#. So that's good and it's bad. It's very flexible. You can do a ton of stuff with it, but it can also be, you can get yourself in trouble because if you've got a variable and you're really expecting a number and you get back a string, well, nobody's going to complain, right? So what they've done with TypeScript is they've added in some of these features. So TypeScript is built as a superset of JavaScript. And the idea is that it is a, you could take a file, you could take jQuery 1.whatever.js and rename it to .ts, and it would be a valid TypeScript file. But then you can go in and you can use TypeScript-specific stuff on it. You can do things like declare a class. You can declare constructors. You can declare types, parameter types. And then here I've got that Web Essentials that I was showing earlier. So I have a vector class. And on the left, I've got class vector, and it's got constructor and all that. Well, that is not going to work in plain JavaScript because JavaScript isn't class-based, right? So what they do instead is declare a vector as an anonymous function. They set up a function that does the constructor and all that stuff. Doing classes in JavaScript is hard. It's hard to do it right. There's some really interesting things. Elijah Manor did a talk at Mix a while ago where he talked about things like variable hoisting, and there's all these kind of JavaScript gotchas, things that if you try and shoehorn classes in and don't really know what you're doing, you can kind of make it work, and then all of a sudden it won't work, and you won't know why. So what I like about this is that this is it's a well thought out system by was Anders, I think, worked on this. So I mean Anders Heilsberg. So It's very like, these are serious language designers that worked on this. And so this is kind of, I don't know, a serious, more professional way of doing this stuff. So what's neat here, this is on the fly, so I can go in and I can change things, and if this thing takes a number, and if I change something here, if I say it takes an asdiff, right, that's not going to work for me. So, and then as I work on things, it's compiling it on the fly over here. So that's kind of a nice thing to look at, especially if you're building up a large JavaScript library. So now what it's doing is it's compiling that to JavaScript. So let's look at this vector class. And you'll see nested here. So I actually renamed it at one point, but it's got this vector.js, so that's the output. So that's actually what you deploy. And this can be minified, right? Vector.min.js. So that's handy. So there we're getting, let's look at vector.min.js. This is not readable. I mean, this is really pretty complex, right? So then you get into the question, which is, how do I debug this? This is a very common question, by people who've done this a bit and maybe gotten burned. Okay, I've used your cool system that generates some JavaScript, but now, it's worthless to me in production. And so the idea with source maps is it's a common syntax, a common way for making it possible to debug things later. So I don't know if this is smart for me to do. I'm going to try and do this. I've got Chrome Canary on here. I'm doing okay on time, so why not? So I'm going to run this, and so this is, I'm referencing that. Now, this isn't going to hurt anything in IE, but it's not going to be supported. So go into Chrome. Actually, I don't even know if I've got source maps enabled here. So we'll figure this out together. I hit F12. Remember, F12 is the common way of bringing up your browser tools in any browser. So now I'm going to go in here and down to Settings. And somewhere in here, let me see, there is a Enable Source Maps. Right, so that's a little checkbox. Now, source maps I'm showing with TypeScript, but this is also this is supported in like CoffeeScript. This is a common thing for newer things that generate JavaScript. So now I've done that. So now I'm going to hit F5 and cross your fingers, maybe it'll work. Okay, so what I've got some TypeScript, TypeScript.ts, and that is in my. Notice I'm not showing it if it worked or not. I'm dragging out the suspense. So I've got this TypeScript file. Where is it? I think this is in my default, my index. Honestly, I don't know where it is. Let's just assume it's there. So I've got some. Actually, why don't I go in and use my page inspector? Trying to teach myself that habit. Okay, so it's spinning this up. So I've got this button, and I have no idea where it came from. So I click Inspect, and I click on it. I wonder if I don't have this up to date. Here it is, TypeScript.ts. And it's way down in here. I think I added this at the end. Let's go back to what I was trying to show, which is the source maps. So if I go in here, and I believe if I go into console, no, I need to debug it. Resources. Yes. Okay, so that's that. So now I want to go in here, and I want to. I'm going to hit debug, or I'm going to hit a breakpoint. Gosh, I forget how to do that. Let me explain what it's doing. So the idea is that a TypeScript, or the source map is a tiny file, and maybe I can find that source map file while I'm talking. But a source map is a tiny file that shows, it gives hints to anything that's debugging it. So here we can actually see source mapping URL equals example.js.map. So that's a tiny JSON file, and that's what's going to be used by the browser in order to debug that. So, so this is a new laptop, and I didn't enable something right. But the idea is that as I browse it, as I debug the JavaScript, as I hover over the .js, it will actually show the .ts that generated it. So it'll show, I use this class method or this whatever it is. So one other thing I wanted to show in here is, again, remember I was showing that the idea of Web Essentials and that it has support for a lot of this stuff. So that's how I did some of this work, where I created, like, here's a CoffeeScript file. So again, like I was showing earlier, and I can right-click on this, and with Web Essentials, I can, let me see, should be able to create, or here, I don't think I have the newest one. I should be able to go in here and say right-click and create bundle, or right-click and minify. So that's the idea there, that I could work with the TypeScript file, bundle it, minify it, output it, and everything, and it would all be handled for me. I'm not sure. I may have that disabled or something. So I'm not sure what the issue is there. Do we have any questions on any of this?
Question?
Question.
Yeah, here. Over on your right.
There it is.
This source mapping, is that, does that work specifically with IE, or is it with any browser?
Source mapping right now is very experimental, so I only see that working. I believe that's only supported in Chrome Canary. So, but it's kind of a standard that they're kind of working towards.
Sweet.
So, yeah. Yep. Any other questions, thoughts? The TypeScript thing is worth keeping an eye on for a few reasons. One is there's a whole compiler written for it, so you can automate this as part of a build process. So you could actually work in TypeScript and as part of your build, do something and put it on a CDN. Another thing is that, we've been looking at JavaScript and jQuery and Modernizer and all that and thinking about browsers, but keeping in mind that Windows 8 allows you to build whole applications using JavaScript and HTML5. Brady's going to be showing you later that you can build apps for Office using HTML5 and JavaScript. So it gets to be more worthwhile to invest some time and effort in learning ways to build, applications, full applications, and not, just web pages, but full applications, and know how to, if you need type checking, that's good to have. Or, if you want to build more complex systems and applications, you can use those and deploy those onto a web app, or you can deploy them into Office or into Windows 8. And so a lot of this, I think, was motivated by people that are building larger applications for Windows 8 and need to be able to handle all their, to handle quite a bit there. I've got a little more time, so I want to show something else off that. This is single page application. So this is something that's new in that fall preview. So here I went new MVC4 app and single page app. So single page application is the idea of, you may be familiar with like Outlook Web or Gmail, some of these things where basically you navigate to a URL and then it never changes. Like all your interaction from then on is you interact with the page, JavaScript calls things onto the server, makes AJAX calls to the server returns XML or JSON data, and it just talks directly back and forth. So here's an example. I think I need to sign up. John, you'll never guess what my password is. Oops, I mistyped it, so I won't either. Sign up. That user already exists? Okay, well, whatever. So here I've got a few to-do lists. So, to do more. Right, so all my interaction here is directly calling back into the server. Now, I'm not going to talk about how it's calling back into the server. That's actually, Xinyang's going to be talking about Web API in a bit. And that's a really nice way to do client-server interaction because you're calling HTTP, you're using HTTP services on the server. But what I do want to show off is how this is implemented. So if we go to, so this is a new preview. Things are changing with it. That was the first thing that was shown at build. But this is using Knockout.js. So Knockout.js is used for bindings, two-way bindings. So what that means is I can have elements on the page that are bound to data that's returned from the server. So let me look here. So here it's using this data-bind, and it's binding information. And so this is wiring up, and it's saying, here's kind of a data source, and here's how to bind it. And so then when this HTML is delivered, it makes an AJAX call to the server. It populates some object, so it holds some data locally, and then Knockout kind of wires that stuff together, binds them together. And it also says, well, if I fill in some text, then Knockout pushes that data back to the object, and it knows how to communicate back to the server. So this is a way that makes it easier. You could always do this. People were doing this 10 years ago. It was just a lot of work. And so combination of Knockout and then the SPA template and the Web API makes it easier to do this communication back and forth. So so I'll show the three things. So we've got the page. Then we've got Knockout, this bindings. So this bindings is where we're kind of wiring things together. And we're also hooking up some things like validation and saying, when this thing changes, do this. So this is kind of where we do some overrides. Then if we look at the to-do list, this is what you'd think of. This is the kind of the logic, the business logic. So this is saying, OK, this is how this works. When the page loads up, do this. These are the rules that are required, that kind of thing. And finally, we have services, which act as our data access. So I think this is kind of interesting. This file is called data access. But everything on here is just making calls back to the server. It's calling services, which sort of makes sense when you think of that, your data is sitting on the server. So your data access is making HTTP calls back to the server. So this is an example. I think this kind of, in a wrapping things up but also kind of rounding things out way. We were talking about HTML5 and JavaScript. We looked at a lot of basics, what HTML5 is, some support for JavaScript and Visual Studio, some of the libraries that are built in. We looked at jQuery and showed how you can build things on top of jQuery to abstract things. And Modernizer, you can use that to abstract things. And then finally, this is a nice way of seeing this all kind of packaged and put together. So this is fun to check out. You can do, if you install this fall update, file new project, SPA template, and hit F5, and it'll all work. And you can see here's a logical extension of HTML5, JavaScript, and modern browsers. Do we have any questions? I think it's about lunchtime, and you guys are done listening to me. Any questions at all, though? No?
Yes, I've got a question.
Yes. Question? Yeah.
Oh, it may be a different animal altogether, but with regard to MVC4, there used to be a MVC2 or 3 design template gallery. It's now seemingly not being maintained anymore. And similarly, is there a repository for HTML helpers, both of which I guess have a little bit of tangential relation to what you've talked about?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a template gallery. I actually helped with that. We moved that, helped open source that. Originally, there was... so the idea is that, there's kind of a standard design for file new project and what it looks like. And it used to be this blue screen with white boxes in the middle, and now it's a little bit updated, but every file new project MVC looks the same. And since they had common classes and everything, the idea was that you could override things. So CSS and images make it look better. So we did get that. I think that was turned over to the MVC Contrib project on Codeplex. Honestly, there's just a very limited number of people working on it. I don't know, honestly, how much interest there was in people using it or contributing to it. So I would love to see more of that, and especially now, I think, with these newer templates, the MVC4 template, it's kind of a better design, and so it's easier to override. So I would love to, actually, I mean, if you want to talk to me at the break, I would love to, get more of that going, because there's really a lot of opportunity for that. Helpers, I used to see more of the HTML helpers on, like in the MVC futures or, different like Codeplex projects. Now I'm seeing more of those in NuGet. So they're actually a decent amount, like there's HTML5 helpers for MVC, and those are available in NuGet. There's HTML5 boilerplate, things like that. So if you search, I think if you go into NuGet and your internet works, important caveat there, then if you type in helpers, I think you'll get some pretty decent ones back. So those are where I'm seeing most of them. Honestly, I think there's so much that could be done, and there's a limited number of people working on it, and they're also building the next version of MVC and Web API, and it's incredible when you talk to people on the ASP.NET team. It's a pretty small team, and they crank out so much stuff. So it's it's just a time and effort. But I would love to see more community support too for building out some templates. That'd be great. Any more questions?
Yes. Hi.
Yes.
We're using ASP.NET, and we're starting to do more and more of migrating to the JavaScript, and it kind of makes my client rather sort of happy and nervous. Happy because he's getting great interactive application. Nervous because all his source code is being downloaded into the browser. Mm-hmm. Is there any way to kind of protect your source code if it's all in JavaScript?
Honestly, I don't think there's really a good way to protect your source code in JavaScript. If it's in the browser, it's code. You can make it harder to read, but that code is in the browser, And so, I mean, if the code's minified, it may be a little trickier. I've seen libraries out there that'll try and obscure things, but I think it's kind of a losing cause. If you do have important, code that you don't want people to figure out, run that on the server and make API calls back to it, right? So you've got most of your code that's in JavaScript is okay for people to see. There's usually smaller bits, validation or, proprietary logic or some kind of, credit card charge, whatever it is. Obviously, you're not going to do that in your browser, so you make those calls back to the server. So that's what I'm seeing a lot more of. And I'd recommend, if that's hard, if you look at your app and you say, well, I can't do that, then that would be kind of a sign that's like, let's look at what is happening in our browser and what we should move over to the server. So that's the only answer I can give. But really, JavaScript running in the browser is pretty easy for people to figure out. So,
yeah, I would like to emphasize what John said, and I think what you should be thinking of is thinking of the JavaScript that's in your browser as the presentation layer. And think about the service that you put on Web API, which is protected as your business logic. And don't try and put business logic in the browser. Keep separation of concerns. Keep presentation in the browser where it belongs. And that's the whole purpose behind tools like the Knockout library that enable you to do those kind of things.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, we've done a fair amount of customization on our widgets, and so that's one thing that we'd like to protect if we can, but I don't think we can. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a losing battle. You can make it difficult enough that somebody would have to invest 100 hours to figure out something they could do in 150 hours, and maybe they wouldn't. But you can't really completely protect it.